I'm sharing my rocking chair with a ghost. So I'll say that my family was always convinced I was sensitive to the other side. I would talk to graves as a toddler and frequently knew things I shouldn't have about deceased family members. I started to have really bad anxiety mid-childhood, and it all went away. I recently started therapy, and my anxiety is going away. I meditate a lot and randomly hear noises like whispering, but I chalk it up all to my imagination. I see shadows in the corner of my eye frequently, and this morning I finally saw him. I woke up and saw a solid man sitting in my rocking chair and smiling. He looked really happy. He didn't look at me at all, but seemed to stare at a corner of the room. My aunt had previously seen a man sitting in a rocking chair in another room, but that was decades ago, and we didn't have a rocking chair. I recently got a rocking chair as a baby shower gift, so I rock my son in it frequently. I don't mind sharing, especially if it makes him happy. I didn't feel scared or uneasy. I felt calm and normal. I'm wondering if this is even possible. Maybe he's the one who touches my hair at night. I've been feeling someone touch my hair at night since early childhood. Anyways, he doesn't scare me, but I'm wondering how to even believe what I saw. This is my first sighting and I'm in my mid-20s. Any advice on to how to get along with William? P.S. I'm not sure if that's his name, it's just what I feel like I should call him. The Antique Chair. I have written about my encounters with the paranormal throughout my life. As it turns out, I have had yet another encounter. This encounter bears some similarity to one when I was a child, where I believe I was made physically ill by an encounter with a spirit of some kind. I recently spent some time in Florida on business. While I was there, my family, dad, mom, brother, and his girlfriend came to visit, since they don't get to see me very often. My parents are getting a little older, and have started to take an interest in antiques. Well, as we were driving around, they noticed an antiques shop, and decided they wanted to check it out. The place was like in a warehouse-type building, on its own lot, with antiques and stuff all around the front. Inside, there was kind of a general storefront, with a bunch of stuff as well, and then a doorway in the middle which led to a hallway, then into the back warehouse part. As you walk back into the warehouse, there was room after room after room, all linked onto each other and filled with antiques and collectibles. Well, from the minute we walk into the building, I started getting this creepy feeling. As I went further and further through each of the rooms, I started feeling worse and worse, not just creeped out, but constricted. I started feeling like there was something heavy all around me. I just ignored it, thinking it was just the layout and building itself. There wasn't a lot of air circulation, so it was probably just stuffy. It's funny what we tell ourselves. I finally made it to the farthest room, in the very back of the building, or so I thought. As I walked around a couple partitions, I see another doorway, leading into another room. But this time it was different. As I walked towards the door, I started getting the sick feeling in my stomach, not enough to really bother me, so I just kept going into the room. It was nothing unusual at first, the same random assortment of old stuff. I walked around a couple of partitions. I noticed that my stomach was feeling worse. Then I reached the far back corner of the room, where a chair sat centered in its own little nook. I froze. It was right then that I noticed I was alone. Up until now, there have been other people around. But now, I was definitely the only person in this room, but I wasn't alone. I stood staring at this chair. Something was there, staring back. I could not physically see it, but I knew it was there. My stomach churned. I could feel the acid rising and burning in my throat. I felt like I was going to be sick. I had to leave. I rushed out and made my way back to the front of the store. The further away from that room I got, the better I felt. I stepped out the front door into the Florida summer heat. Oddly enough, this felt like a relief. I could breathe. After a moment, the sick feeling subsided. I was done and over this place, but my family wasn't, so I went back to rush them along. I navigated my way through the maze of antiques, trying to find my family, who were in the very back at this point. As I drew closer to that back room, I could feel myself getting sick again. I finally found my parents in the next to last room, just before the one with the chair. I don't remember the conversation, to be honest, but I remember them saying, "Nah, We don't really need to go in that back room. I told him I would wait out in front. Again, as I fled the building, the sickness subsided, and a few moments later I felt fine. You should know that my folks are not the type to react like that. In any other situation, they'd just go back and check out that last room, with the logic of, well, we already came this far. I was genuinely surprised to hear that they were not going into that room. I know the spirits can attach to people, like old furniture and stuff like that, but I've never encountered anything like this. I did not stick around to ask questions, but I can only imagine the kind of negative entity that is attached to that chair. I worked in a haunted medieval store. First post here. I hope I'm doing everything alright. First things first, let me mention that this is one of the many paranormal experiences I've experienced in my life. I have always been highly sensitive to what I believe are spirits in most cases, and have a plethora of events I could discuss at length. This one, however, is one of the most memorable things I've ever experienced, and incidentally, one of the scariest. I am not particularly brave. I can't stomach scary movies at all, but somehow I always end up being too curious for my own good, and end up in scary situations. Go figure. With that said, on to the main event. Back in 2007, age 19, I moved from my hometown to the nearest big metropolis to attend university. I spent most of the previous summer working 2 jobs, including one at a medieval store, part of a bigger chain. We sold outfits, swords, jewelry, gargoyles, and all sorts of figurines and knickknacks. I've been a really good employee during my tenure, and when I told my manager I was moving and had to quit, he very kindly mentioned that one of the stores from the chain actually needed an employee, right in the city I was moving to. Needless to say, I was pretty thrilled. He forwarded my CV to the manager in the other store, and she replied that she'd gladly take me on as soon as I moved. So summer goes by, I move to the big city, and in September, I start working at the new location. First, let me describe the surroundings a bit. The store was located in the oldest part of town, and considering the city is 375 years old, those buildings have a lot of history. The street was long, narrow and cobbled, very busy in the summertime, swarming with tourists. The store was on the bottom floor of a tall, very narrow building. The store's dimensions were like 16 something wide, 65 deep approximately, something like that. The top floors were occupied by a busy bar and pub. There was only one door, spilling out directly onto the street, flanked by the big display window where we put mannequins dressed in our wares. The very back of the store had another mannequin adorned display window, but no door, since the street parallel to ours was actually quite far below. That part of town had been built on a very sloped land, so every street going down to the river was lower than the other. This is pretty important to the story. The minute I stepped into the store, I felt something was off. It was stifling in there. The air was heavy. I was immediately uneasy, but couldn't exactly spit on a job that actually paid well, where I knew what to do and quite well, and that worked out with my student schedule, so I buried my concerns and got to work. I got along really well with my new coworkers, became good friends with the manager, the money was easy, things were going swimmingly. But boy, I was feeling on edge whenever I had to close and work alone in the shop. The store was dark, long, and narrow, lined with gargoyles, mirrors, swords, and mannequins. To close, you had to go all the way in the back in the storage room, flip off all the breakers, and then head back all the way to the front of the store in pitch darkness to get out through the front door. Needless to say, I pretty much sprinted out of there as fast as the lights were off. Now, well and good, we could chalk all this uneasiness to the actual decor and architecture of the place, but not once did I feel any of that in my old store back in my hometown, and I had been in the old part of town in a truly ancient building. Nothing tangible happened for about a month or 2. I was feeling weird and uneasy, but couldn't say with any kind of certitude that something was actually there. And then around late fall, around Halloween, I know, cliche as fuck, stuff started happening. I was opening the store one morning, and as I entered the shop, a massive gargoyle that had been on the shelf at least 16 feet up was in the middle of the floor, like it had been put there on purpose facing the door. Now, that was not a light gargoyle. Needless to say, I was a little unnerved. After that initial event, I would find stuff misplaced all the time, things finding themselves in weird places, figurines in our bathroom, things on shelves switching places, hanging things crashing to the floor with no warning whatsoever. And then there were the steps. The floor of the store was old, worn hardwood that was very creaky and unforgiving. The lightest weight on it would make it crack and creak in the most obvious way, and it would start cracking all the time, even if no one was stepping on it. There are many instances of hearing steps when I was just standing behind the cash register doing my thing. One night, I was working with my manager, let's call her Jay, and I let it slip that weird things were happening. I was expecting her to laugh and reassure me I was making things up, but the face she made definitely let me know that I was not the only person experiencing these things. She spilled everything. She told me about things moving, furniture rattling, steps, things flying off shelves, and feelings of deep uneasiness. The unsettling thing is that Jay is one of the least spirit-sensitive people I know. She lived in many haunted apartments without noticing a thing, including one aggressive poltergeist entity, but that's another story for another time altogether. And even she was a little freaked out. So right there and then, I had confirmation that at least some of my experiences weren't at all completely outlandish. I worked there through the winter. Things had stabilized in some way. Stuff was still happening, but I had started getting used to it and would just be mildly annoyed when I come in the morning and find things in odd places. By the time summer rolled around, however, things started escalating. Whatever was inhabiting the space had decided that moving things wasn't enough. It decided to start messing with us, not just with me. The whole staff started experiencing things, even my manager, with the sensitivity of a teaspoon, and the most skeptical of employees. An employee I'll name C came in one morning, and as she was sweeping the floor by the changing cabins, they were covered in large mirrors, sworn she briefly seen a figure that definitely wasn't in the reflection. When I got to work later that day, she was standing behind the cash register by the door and looked very shaken. She basically hadn't moved all day, too scared to get close to the mirrors, and honestly, I didn't want to either. She told me how she brushed all the little things off, but that was definitely something she never experienced before, and she was really freaked out. Another employee was definitely not the scaredy type, a big guy, very skeptical in his ways, and definitely scoffed at our concerns. Well, one night, as he was closing with our other male employee H, he felt a very cold, very solid hand between his shoulder blades pushing him. It was the most physical the entity ever got with one of us directly, aka actually touching one of us. I found it very interesting that I picked one of the most skeptical out of all of us to manifest itself like that. In any case, E was seriously freaked out, tried to explain it away, but of course, how the hell do you justify an ice-cold hand pushing you in the middle of a store with nothing near you? E was very tall too, towered over all of us by a head. Whatever touched him had to be tall too. H, who was present and standing behind the cash register, a good 12 feet in front of E, did not see anything touch him. H, incidentally, had one of the scariest experiences. It happened the summer before I started working. On a busy night, he was wrapping something for a client behind the cash register counter. On the wall behind the register, we hung swords. It was the most structurally sound wall, so it made sense to hang the heavier swords there. They were permanently locked and heavy, custom-made brackets with padlocks. You really had to want that sword for us to unlock it because it was such a pain in the ass. For no reason whatsoever, one of the swords fell out of one of the brackets and literally slashed his face out of nowhere. We kept those swords religiously locked. The odds of someone leaving a bracket open were slim to none, and even then, they were very heavy swords that needed some force to get out of the bracket. Poor H needed to get 4 stitches on his cheek. He was never quite the same after the incident, and was very affected by the vibe in the store. I think he was highly sensitive, and definitely picked up on the negative energy in the store. He quit the following summer because he just become too scared of working on his own. Needless to say, I absolutely did not want to work by myself either. The only one who seemed unaffected was M, the most skeptical out of the whole staff. M would literally burst out laughing and make fun of us when we spoke about things happening. It's an old building, things settle, the walls are soft, someone with a spare key is pulling a prank on y'all, etc. She was not believing anything and thought we were all collectively freaking ourselves out. I think that her dismissal angered or bothered whatever was haunting our store, and it may have explained some of the escalation of events. The entity got more aggressive and started literally breaking things. We come to work to find things shattered, and stuff would hurtle off the walls and come crashing down beside us. We hear furniture rattle in the back store and played rock, paper, scissors to find out who would have to go in there to turn off the light breakers in there at night. I was so terrified that when I closed, I pleaded with my boyfriend at the time to come get me so I wouldn't close on my own. I was once locked in there during my shift. I was rummaging for a box and the door slammed behind me. The key, which I'd sworn I brought with me, was nowhere to be found. Thank God my manager Jay was there with a spare key to let me out. That's also happened to her. And to E as well. We were all on edge except M, until one morning. I got to work and M was already there. She'd gotten there early to chill and eat breakfast, but when I got there she was standing in the back of the store and was looking a little freaked out. I asked her what's up, and she told me that's when she'd gone in, that there would be a heavy feeling to the store, like the place was crowded by bad energy. She tried shaking it off, but could not for the life of her feel good or truly alone. She'd felt watched, and was not liking it one bit. I think that the fact that she was actually physically ill and physically feeling it was what freaked her out the most. And sadly for her, that feeling never really went away. So she also quit in late summer. She was feeling on edge every time she worked and not like herself, and literally told us that she felt if she stayed there any longer, she'd go crazy. That definitely did not cheer us up. Our staff was up and leaving en masse. We were scared to work, saw things in mirrors and chairs, and even my notably spiritually insensitive manager was feeling like she was going a little insane. Things kept being weird and intense all summer and subsequent fall. Even clients picked up on the vibe. One woman refused to get into the store, claiming that there was something in the store that didn't want us there. That freaked me out so much, I felt cagey and on edge all day after that. I was jumpy, I had nightmares, I slept like hell. I was also in university full-time and working full-time. I was exhausted and really over it. By the time winter rolled around again, I was ready to throw in the towel. Christmas came and went, and after that, it got really dead in our part of town. I live in a very snowy and cold winter climate, and most of our clients were summer tourists. Business literally went dead after December until at least March. So I spent entire days alone at the store with one or two clients in my entire shift. It was awful. I was waiting to land another job to quit, but then something happened that made the cherry on top of the cake. One fateful February day, I got into work knowing full well that I probably wouldn't get a client that day. It was dark, gray, snowing, and windy as fuck that day, full on store mode. I wondered why I even bothered showing up. It would have been smarter to close that day. But my manager was working with me, and I decided I did not want to leave her alone. So I get to the store, it's dark and gloomy in there, and my manager is there already kind of throwing a fit. Once she looked at herself in the mirror, when she got there earlier, she felt like she wasn't looking at herself. It's hard to explain, but she had the distinct feeling that it wasn't her in the mirror staring back. I'm not sure if that makes sense, but I immediately understood what she meant. She kinda lost it and started yelling at whatever was here to leave us be, and to stop messing with us. And that basically just happened as I arrived, and for the rest of the day, we were both jumpy and on edge. Of course, there wasn't a single client. It was mid-afternoon, dark outside, because the sun sets early in the winter time, so dark indoors too, and it was just miserable. We were sitting in the middle of the store, and lacing a big pile of bodices we got earlier that week, when we heard one of the tables in the back of the store rattling. When my manager went to check, she called me over. An entire display of little leather pouches that had been painstakingly arranged on the table had been tossed right off. Little pouches everywhere, the table was askew, and long scratches had been gouged in the surface. Not deep by any means, but there. We were freaking the fuck out. That's when my manager noticed the mannequins in the back display window. They were facing inside the store, and not out, as they should have been. She asked me if I moved them today, and I obviously hadn't. The only time we would actually move those was when we changed our clothes. No one could possibly have moved them, since the only door to the store was all the way at the opposite end. I noticed then that every single mannequin in the store was actually turned towards us. including the ones in the front display window. How or when that happened, I'll never know. I have no explanation to this day if it was just a prank. It was so well orchestrated, I wondered what kind of mastermind had this much time to waste scaring the fuck out of a little team of hapless teenagers and young adults just trying to get by. My hands are shaking as I type this. To this day, it is one of the strangest things that's ever happened to me. Realizing that all the mannequins have been turned towards us, I still get major shivers whenever I tell people about this experience. I felt watched and so unsafe it was horrifying. My body was in fight or flight mode and I felt physically ill. I had to get out of there not a minute too soon. That's pretty much when I decided that it was enough. I pretty much told my manager, okay, that's it, I've had enough. I'm leaving this place and never coming back. Fuck this, I'm going home. She didn't want to stick around either, so we grabbed all of our shit and left right there and then. Didn't turn off the breakers, didn't do any closing procedures. We got our shit, put the key in the door and hightailed it out of there. I never went back. The owners decided to close for the remainder of the winter the week after. We all got on unemployment benefits until we found new jobs, and when they opened again in April or something, I told my old supervisor when he called offering me a job that I'd rather literally die than set foot in the store again. I walk in front of the old building a few times a year when my errands take me to the old part of town. They closed the store permanently a few years ago, and to this day it remains vacant. I ran into the barmaids and waiters that used to work upstairs a few times. We'd often chat on our respective porches when we go out to smoke back when I worked there. Last summer I was walking on the street below the shop and ran into one of the barmaids. We started chatting and catching up, and she was telling me how our old store was still vacant, and that whoever visited to open something in it back out of it last minute or changed their minds. I decided to bite the bullet and ask her if anything strange or uncanny had ever happened in the bar. At the risk of looking a little strange, she looked at me with big eyes and nodded. All the time, she said, chairs flying, bottles shattering, barmaids and waiters hearing weird sounds at nighttime, doors closing on their own volition, and a plethora of others. We exchanged stories for a good hour. I'm quite convinced that the entire building is haunted. Wouldn't be surprising. In that part of town, where most buildings are over 200 years old, I never quite knew what it was that was there, what its motivations were. But one thing was sure, it definitely did not want us there. Let me mention that I am a scientist at heart. I would never label myself as a skeptic by any means, but I do love a good logical scientific explanation to things. If I could have debunked any of the events mentioned, I would have gladly had, but there are no words, not a single explanation I could have possibly have for the horror, sense of dread and events that unfolded when I worked there, and even now, nearly 10 years later, you could never pay me enough to set foot back in there. Not in a million years.